And then, you're trying to dig down deeper as to why we're in a deficit. And some of the reasons. You've got, the NI costs are going up. You've got utilities that are going up. You've got all those things that might be connected to rent. So things that are outside your control. And then you're thinking, right, there's a bit of a giving lag because new people are coming and we're growing, and that's just Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office Podcast. My name is Gavin Smith. Let me start again. That was terrible. Well, good morning and welcome to the Church Office Podcast. My name is Gavin, and it's a joy today to welcome you to our Admin and Ops podcast. We love talking about the work of ministry behind the scenes, whether it's structure, whether it's people, whether it's processes. We love all of that and seek to serve churches in thinking through some of these issues. And it's a joy to get different guests on who understand this, who are working with local churches all over the country. And Matthew Dalton, thank you so much for joining us today, mate, on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me. I feel somewhat humbled and ill-equipped, but hopefully there'll be something of interest for people. But thank you.
There will be. And Matthew and I have connected sort of at the Reach conference, and we've developed a bit of a friendship. And again, just a mutual respect for what we're doing. And I'd love, when I was just chatting to Catherine, I was like, we've got to get Matthew on the podcast and just learn from his wisdom. And he's really well respected, and you'll understand as you get through the episode just how good he is. Before we get into our topic, we wanted to just do again a big shout out to Gavin and Church Suite and just their generosity in supporting the podcast and sponsoring the podcast. Lots of churches know about their good work that they do. Thousands of churches across the UK and now further afield across the world are using the software that they've developed, really to help churches get organized, really to help churches in their communication, in working with the church, whether it be through rotas, through small groups, whether it be through your kids ministries and helping connect people and families and doing sign in and register and all of those things, all the things that we do and have done probably by paper. These guys have taken it and gone, right, how do we make this work? What I love about them is their heart for the gospel, their heart for the local church. So as we give money monthly to the subscription, we are getting a great service and people who are updating it and thinking about the church and how to bless the church. So thank you to Gavin and Church Suite and all of their support. Matthew, let's get into you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the church that you go to. You're married with a couple of kids, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, married to Kathy. I think we've been married about 22 years. I've slightly lost count. There or thereabouts, maybe 23 coming up for a real joy throughout. We've got two daughters, Anna, who is 19 earlier this week, is off at university, and Ruth, who is 16 at home, starting A-levels. They've been a real joy to see them grow, and especially grow in their knowledge of the Lord over the years.
Yeah.
We're down in southwest London in a place called Rains Park. Most people have never heard of it. We're right next to Wimbledon. Everyone's heard of Wimbledon.
Yeah.
Everyone asks if I've been to the tennis. Not since I've lived in Rains Park for the last 23 years. But before that, a couple of times. We're just down the hill from Wimbledon Common. We're the sort of place, I think, where the Wombles dump their rubbish. But it's a lovely place, really.
Yeah, that's great. And you're the Chief Operating Officer for Commission. And just for people who are listening to the podcast, would explain a little bit about Commission and then we'll chat a bit more about your role. That'd be great.
Thank you. Commission, we've been going for, it's quite hard to tell exactly how long, just over 23 years, probably something like that, maybe about the same time I got married, actually. And it's a network that is seeking to reach London by planting churches and sharing the good news of the Lord Jesus. We started very, very small. I mean, as you would kind of expect, just with a couple of churches that were planted from Dundonald and also one from St. Helens. A big shout out to them. for their generosity in planting Christchurch Mayfair and getting us involved in that. And really, Co-Mission grew out of, I suppose, a vision that we could do more together than we could on our own. And so in the early days, it was 2 or 3 churches doing a combined weekend away. That's grown from, I think the first one which I went on was probably just over 100 people. We carted off somewhere near the south coast. Can't remember exactly where it was. It's quite wet and pretty grim as a weekend, but some great teaching in that. And we've continued to do that. And last summer we had just over 2,000 people on a field down in Canterbury gathered to praise the Lord Jesus and to really encourage one another and spur one another on in our mission to reach London for Christ. We're not the only network in London. It's well worth saying that. I've already said St. Helens, but there are others as well who are doing amazing work in London. Lots of them planting churches. It's a big old city. There's 9 million people. I don't know, the most generous kind of stats say about 800, 900,000 of those go to church on a Sunday. I'm not sure how many of those hear the gospel on a Sunday. But that gives you an idea of the scale. So there's at least 8 million people in this city, at least 8 million who don't know the Lord Jesus and who face an eternity cut off from God. And that is a disaster of epic proportions. We're not the answer for all of them, but we want to do all that we can to try and reach as many as we can. And so we're having a go. We're having, under God and by his grace, we're seeing some real encouragements, but there remains lots and lots to do. So from those humble beginnings, I think we're now, depends how you count them, but about 30 churches that are fully committed to our mission. We've got some friends as well who are increasingly behind what we're doing. So it's an exciting time.
It's tremendous, and if you've not heard of Commission, then go and check out their website. And I love the kind of clarity that comes from the website, and even just as you're talking about the vision of why Commission exists, isn't it? That's the kind of the why question. You've got a very clear boundary. We're reaching London. We're working and partnering together, and just knowing some of the churches that link through the network. The benefit of being able to work alongside others that feels like relatively close, but actually the communities in London are very different. And we were chatting before about how do you reach London? It's actually quite a complex question to answer, isn't it? And I know you're saying you're not the answer, but you're part of this as a real desire to reach out with the gospel. Share with us a little bit about that, because you're talking there about kind of strategy, aren't we, and support of one another. It's really interesting.
I think someone who summed it up brilliantly for me was Johnny Prime from the FIC when he took over from Trevor Archer as the London director, and he said that London is it's a city, but it's actually 120 towns or neighbourhoods that are linked together, and actually even within those there are many villages that make up those towns. And so I think it's very easy to look at London as a sort of homogenous, big city. I guess you see everyone's seen the pictures of the Square Mile where you have the nice, tall, shiny buildings and Tower Bridge in the foreground. I'm pretty sure if you look on our website, you'll find a picture like that. The reality is it's one of the most diverse cities in history in the world. And it is, I think, increasingly, and I'm sure this is true outside of London as well, that the world is, whilst it's becoming more global, it's also becoming more local. And I think where people seek community, where they're looking to spend their time and get to know people, is becoming more and more local. To the extent where, you can have, I think you can, an individual road will provide a boundary in London. So down where we are in Rains Park, the A3 sort of runs between Rains Park and New Malden. The number of people that will sort of go across that road as a boundary on a weekend is actually remarkably few. So, what is half a mile as the crow flies might as well be, 20, 30, 40 miles.
Yeah.
And so, I was saying before we started recording that when I started this role 7 years ago, I think we all had a bit of a sort of view that you had a map of London and we would scatter churches sort of evenly across it, and that would be the answer. What we're seeing now is that really isn't it. You can have two churches very, very close together, maybe with different ecclesiology, but actually in some instances even the same ecclesiology, reaching very different people groups. And that's a wonderful opportunity. It's also an incredible headache and challenge. But actually, I think within that, there's lots to give thanks to God for. We've grown so much in our understanding, and yet I think we're barely scratching the surface even now.
Yeah. Oh, mate, it's great, and it just makes you think, doesn't it, about the detail and level of detail that's needed, almost that kind of community profiling and really understanding where we're trying to reach, and just thinking about plants and how you move forward in all of that. Yeah, there's so much complexity in all of that, and so much thought that's and I love the fact that you guys aren't a denomination, you're a network, you're wanting to encourage one another, to shape each other, to work together. That every church that I've met, through commission, that the strength of that sense of being like a family together on mission is lovely. And I think one of the things I've really appreciated is the layers of that, isn't it? So you guys are getting leaders together, but there's also a sense of those churches partnering together, those members even kind of, coming together. So it's happening at different levels, not just at a leadership level. And I think that's really impressive. And have you seen fruit in that?
Yeah, huge strength actually through that. So every network, I suppose, has their sort of, schedule of events and stuff like that. Basically our year is formed around 3 conferences that we run. The first one is for staff. So all staff from all churches come together, so that, whether you are on the ops team, pastoral team, women's worker, kids worker, we all gather in November. This year we're about 140, 145 at that. And that's a really precious time. And I guess, for your audience in particular, as, ops managers, administrators, it can feel really lonely.
Yeah.
I think, the reality of working in a local church is, on Sunday, it feels like the whole world's descended on you. And then by the end of Monday, you're sat in an office on your own, trying to work out what you're doing that week. So for our network, for the administrators and ops managers in that's such a precious time to get together with other people who know the pressures you face, who understand some of the challenges, who get how hard it is sometimes to fill a rota. To share encouragements, to pray for one another, to actually share best practice is really, really precious. And I guess, I suppose this is true wherever you are. I would say, the one thing that I've taken away from commission is really look for people near you who can help you. And actually, you might be surprised how much they can help you, even when you're sat there thinking no one's ever faced this problem before. Often they have. I think you guys have got some amazing resources that can really help people, but also don't underestimate how much a church in the next town could help. Just reaching out to them, building bonds, going for a coffee. I think it's really precious to do that sort of thing. And I guess the advantage of being in a network is someone else organises that for you and makes you go away on a conference. So that's that.
You just turn up and be part of it. It's great. Yeah,
absolutely. And we've just had our sort of leaders conference this week. So that was 3 days. We were just down in the Surrey Hills, which was lovely. So that was the leaders coming together. That's really important for us. They are really the sort of the gatekeepers to the partnership across the churches. And that was a really encouraging, happy time. We had some deep theological kind of talks there, some encouraging Bible expositions, and also, and I think it's probably the most important thing, the whole conference, just downtime to share, to pray for one another, to encourage, to console one another, I guess, in the hardship. So that's our sort of spring conference, and then in the summer we have Revive, which is our big festival, which is for everyone in the network. So, for people in the congregations to come together, it's slightly like a weekend away on steroids. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
It's grown into a bit of a monster, but it is just, it's just amazing.
there's
And
life there in that, isn't there? Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the challenges of being a church planting network is you're saying goodbye to good friends all the time.
mm.
In Dundonald, when I first became a Christian here back in 2001, 2002, we'd just started planting. And over the period of about 10, 11 years under the audacious leadership of Richard Coker, we planted 8 churches. And just the pain of seeing good friends leave was very tangible. I mean, God was very good, and every time we sent 30, 40 off to some other borough in London or other sort of nearby place, he would always provide out of that sort of loss, if you like. There would be people who stepped up and did stuff that you had no idea had the gifts that they do. But actually, once a year, each year, we gather together, and I get to see people who I did ministry with 20 years ago, who were dear friends, and they're still going in the faith. That's the biggest shot in the arm I get in the year.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so your role then kind of in commission, tell us a bit about kind of that day-to-day stuff. There's a lot there. Those even just thinking about those 3 events, there's a bit of chunk of work there. And I know you've got a team that work with you, but what does it look like for you? What are you bringing and thinking through?
Yeah, I don't know, Gavin. Some days I'm not quite sure, but I think my primary role is encouraging and spurring my team on. Because I've got Sarah and Ellie who run our events are just amazing. They have an enormous job on their hands, but they do it wonderfully. They're both absolutely stuck into commission churches. I know they are incredibly valuable to their churches, but what they really bring is that knowledge to the table. They understand, what it feels like to be a part of the network, not just to be running the network. So a big part is helping them. I guess I bring sort of some things that they're perhaps less thrilled about doing around budgeting and forecasting and all that sort of stuff. I guess I've got some background in that. We've then got a small media team, Adam and Nathan. They're doing podcasts like this. They're doing, the handouts for all our conferences. They're, lots of social media and all the rest. They're amazing. Actually, Nathan doesn't go to a commission church. He goes to another wonderful church down at Grace Church, Greenwich.
Okay.
Big shout out to them. But it's that's a real strength, actually, having someone outside the network who can kind of go, that looks a bit odd. Are you really sure you want to say that? And so it's great, and it reminds us that we're not on our own in London. There are lots of other faithful churches out there, and we want to be a blessing to them. So a big part of my role is just, I don't know, it sounds a bit patronizing, looking after them. They're all grown adults that need a great deal of looking after. But sometimes
you're bringing that leadership
to
the team, aren't you? You're bringing that leadership. You're bringing that strategy, I guess.
Absolutely, making sure that we're continuing to focus on what the important thing is. Keep the main thing, as the Australians. That's all they say, isn't it? Half the time. But actually, that is really true, because they will get lost in the detail, just in the same way, every local church, your whole vision gets narrowed in on what you're doing. My job, I guess, is to keep pulling us back to, okay, how is this really advancing the mission to London? So that's a big piece. I don't lead the leadership team, but I help organise them. Andy Mason's our mission director. He took over from Richard Coken 18 months ago. Wonderfully, God has been very, very good in that leadership transition. I think there are many networks out there that have struggled seeing the founder move on and the next leader raise up. Wonderfully, I don't think that has been a huge problem for us. And actually, Andy is a wonderful leader for the next sort of 5-10 years for us at least, and has really built on the foundations that were laid down, which were all, it's just the gospel. I mean, Richard would say, lay the foundation. The gospel is the foundation.
Yes.
The imperative of taking that out to London is our mission, and that mission really does trump everything, actually. And you sort of alluded to it. We've got lots of churches from different backgrounds. You've got Church of England churches, AME churches, FIC churches, Baptist churches, even working together. That is quite unusual. That is quite unusual, and I think it's a real strength. But within that, there's quite a few headaches for me in my role, just working out how do we bring them together? How do we not overload them?
Yeah.
Gosh, other things that I do, fundraising is a big thing. To run a network of the scale of Commission in one of the most expensive cities in the world. It's not quite the most expensive, but boy, it's not cheap. I know everyone who comes to the Reach conference always moans about going out for a beer in the evening and needing a mortgage. That's true of almost everything in London. So that's a big task, and just really helping. Andy, our mission director, John T. Alcock, who'll be known to many, is our assistant mission director, and then Andy Harker, the wonderful Andy Harker, who really is I guess. He's the unsung hero, really. He's our church planting catalyst. He's trying to help churches to plant churches. And so I do kind of lots of different things in the average week, helping everyone to make sure that they can do what they need to be doing. In my glum times, I say I do all the things that no one else wants to do, but it's not quite true.
Yeah, it's a real privilege, isn't it, to kind of sit in that role to team, to help people with structure, help people with strategy, caring for those who are making those brave steps out, that courage to go and plant, to go and do something.
Absolutely. They are the heroes. Let's be honest. In ministry, it is the average congregation member going out and having a gospel conversation. That's the I guess that's the pointy end of the arrow that we're all involved in, whether you're in a local church or a network. Ultimately, that's what we want, isn't it? That people would sit down, open the Bible with non-believers and share something of the majesty and authority and supremacy of Jesus and the wonder of salvation in him.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. So on the back of kind of finishing off your leaders conference, and I appreciate you taking the time. The last thing you want to do after 3 days away is get on a podcast. So I thanks for doing this. Where are you kind of seeing some of the challenges that leaders are facing? That would be really interesting. Just kind of real live data of just bringing what are folks in the network feeling and struggling with.
I think, I'm not sure that. Well, maybe this has changed over the years. I think what's certainly changed is the acknowledgement of it. I think whatever situation you're in, we all feel kind of slightly like frauds and imposters. We don't really know what to do quite often, and I think for leaders of churches, for leaders of ops teams, for just even for the humble soul part-time administrator trying to kind of do things. I think often we feel that everyone else knows what they're doing and we don't. And I think that can be really debilitating. I think actually understanding that everyone is trying to grasp, trying to work out what to do, can sometimes be really liberating. Actually, there isn't someone out there with the answer.
Yeah.
But equally, actually, there are lots of people out there with experience. And whilst that might not always, check out perfectly in your situation, I think knowing that there are others out there who are grappling with things, who have grappled with things, it's not necessarily that they've got it 100% right, um, but that shared wisdom, that shared experience can be really, really valuable. And I think that means that people are getting more open to that than they have been in the past. I think that's a real strength. I think that's wonderful. I guess allied to that, and I don't know what it's like, in your listeners' positions, places around the country, but certainly in London, there's all sorts of arguments over whether the Quiet Revival stats are right or not. Um, but the reality is there are people coming to churches that have not come to churches for years in numbers that I don't think we've experienced for decades. And that growth brings with it challenges. There are people coming through our doors who haven't grown up with scripture being taught in schools. Even if it's been taught really badly, people don't know things like the Lord's Prayer anymore, and they did probably 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
The experience of people coming to churches these days is very different. And I think societally, attitudes are very different. People are looking for community, but I'm not sure they quite know what community looks like sometimes. And I think for church leaders, thinking about how do you bring those people in? How do you welcome them? How do you love them? How do you connect them with ministry?
Yeah.
How do you connect them with the gospel is challenging.
Yeah.
We often say, I think, one of the things I've noticed over the last couple of years, we often say that church is a family. And that's great when you've lived in it for kind of 20 years or so, and you kind of get what that means. But actually, for most people in Britain today, when you say the word family, they're not thinking the big extended family. At best, they're thinking the nuclear family. Actually, often they're thinking single parents struggling to get by. So I think just even in the language we use, sometimes I think we're making assumptions that people get what we're saying when often that's not true. In a whole pressed world where there's ongoing financial shocks, it feels like we're living through a time when conflicts are just just hitting you in the face from websites, news websites. People are looking for community, but they don't always know what that looks like or even how to engage with that. And so I think that's a big challenge for people.
Yeah.
And again, leaning on how others have addressed that, have experienced that, what they're doing. You said earlier, before we recorded this, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. That is absolutely true. Church history is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
You look back at the early church in Acts. There's lots and lots to learn there.
Yeah.
Equally, there's lots to learn from others who are trying things and having a go. I mean, even talking to someone who's tried something, it's failed miserably. At least well, maybe I won't try that, or
Yeah.
I'll think and pray a little bit more about that when we try it. So, yeah, I think those are some of the challenges. Sorry, I've waffled
Yeah.
on for ages
No,
there.
I think that's really good, isn't it? And I think you know, an average church member, might be quite critical of their leader of giving time to that kind of relational development with other leaders. And we there's plenty of work to be done in the local church. Why are they going out?
Yeah.
And there's always those kind of tensions that do exist. And as a leader, we can underinvest in those relationships, those kind of little partnerships that happen with churches. And I do think, the great thing about commission is that you've got that regular conversation because you're part of a network that's interacting with churches and you're on mission
Yeah.
together. And if you're in a church where that's not the case, and even the
Mm.
church feels a little bit on its own. Even though you might be part of FIC, you may not still have those
Mm.
relationally. And I think, yeah, if you're a leader listening to that, you know, there is benefit, and you do have to carve that time out in your diary.
Absolutely.
It's the one thing that goes, but it's also the one thing that there's real life in as well, isn't there? And there's real personal development and professional development, in a sense, in those things where you can
Completely.
we kind of front load, don't we, training for leaders, and
Yeah.
then it's sort of, yeah, well, we'll get to a conference, but yeah, thinking through what do I need as a leader, what can I
Mm.
invest and learn from other churches, is a really helpful conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the analogy I would draw for people, if you are I guess, a listener of this podcast, and you're not in church leadership, you're not in a ministry team, you're just interested.
Yeah,
You love
yeah,
Christian content, you want to learn more. Um, we would think it would be daft for the average person not to be part of a growth group or home group, whatever, whatever your church calls them.
mm,
And the reason that is because you're an ordinary Christian going about being an ordinary Christian in an ordinary community, and actually you share encouragements, and you share prayer requests, you share the challenges, you share the highs and the lows, and I think that's true of leaders as well. You need to spend time with others so that you can encourage them, and they can encourage you. We are to bear one another's burdens, and there are unique challenges in church leadership, as there are in ops teams,
yeah,
in kids and youth teams, all of those sorts of things. Having the opportunity to have a conversation with someone who understands that, who gets that, is vital. When we go, I guess I worked in the secular world for 20 odd years, and you would think it was daft not to talk to colleagues, not to talk to other departments in your business, not to talk to other businesses.
yeah.
Everyone is encouraged to do that now, I think, more or less in the workplace. And that is just as true of Christian ministry. Um, and I think, you can't read a New Testament letter and that not shout at you that we are all part of the kingdom. The kingdom's the important thing. We might be, I guess, responsible or entrusted stewarding a small corner of that, but work alongside brothers and sisters who are also doing the same thing to build the same kingdom for the glory of the Lord Jesus. So yeah, as an ordinary church member, encourage your leaders to do that, to make that, um, that investment, to carve that time out. As you say, the urgent is the tyranny of our diaries, and in any church setting, no matter how small you are or how big you are, your diary will fill up with things that need to be done or should be done. But you're going to run out of steam if you're not being encouraged and supported, and just borne along with other believers, others who are in the same settings as you. So do make that a real priority.
I think if you're, admin and ops person listening to this, or a treasurer, or someone in that kind of position that's working through maybe the finance to enable someone to go to a conference, I think sometimes leaders aren't overly confident at asking for money, and sometimes when they do, then we can sometimes be the sticky people that go, well, what's the benefit, and oh, you did a conference last year, and we can kind of,
Yeah,
we want to steward
yeah.
our funds well, but actually we've got to have this vision that actually put aside a budget in on your line that goes, how can I bless and develop my leader? Where can I send him for a lunch date? Where can
Yeah.
we facilitate some of these things? Because actually the longevity of ministry and the fruit that comes from going and learning, being part of something like a network like you, but in an informal way, just building relationships with other churches, and then being able to those staff to interact on those churches, and even where congregations can come together and interact together, what a difference that makes. So there are some practical things I think that actually we can do, that I can do as I reflect on this myself. What more could I do to bless our pastors in this area?
Mm.
And that might be a helpful takeaway for someone for the podcast.
It's absolutely right. I mean, I guess, to sort of paint an example that you sort of alluded to there, you're as an ops person, you're sat there, you're staring at this budget, you're staring, and often at the moment those will be deficit budgets. That's actually quite scary as an ops person. It's less scary when you're in ministry because you're kind of, it'll be fine, it'll be fine.
God will provide it
The
all.
ops person's going, yeah, I know, but actually there's something called cash flow, and that might kill us. So, so actually, but having your leader excited and able to cast the vision that will capture people to give, honestly, think of that 3 day, that 3 day conference. Maybe that's the FIC Leaders Conference. I don't know. It hasn't happened yet, but maybe it's Rising Light, something, or some Bible by the beach even. Actually going in as a leader and spending time with other leaders, you can find them out. I mean, you have a room of 100 people, the two ministers will find each other within about 3 minutes.
Yeah,
there's just something, there's some kind of glow around them that they go, okay.
Yeah.
And actually spend that time because, invariably they'll come back encouraged. They will come back more in love with Jesus. And that has got to be a good thing when they stand up and present the numbers and say, look, this is reality. God has given us everything we've got. Could you prayerfully consider getting involved in this? So, as you're looking at that deficit budget, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Realize that those things can be really valuable investments.
Yeah, absolutely right. And we were talking before we were recording, weren't we? That my job this week was, we had a church meeting, and the first time in 22 years that I've been involved in the finances is the first year we've ever had a deficit budget. And
is there a link?
Sorry,
is there a link there?
Yeah, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, so how do we communicate this to the church? And they've never even seen that or experienced that. And then you're trying to dig down deeper as to why we're in a deficit, and some of the reasons. You've got the NI costs are going up, you've got utilities that are going up, you've got all those things that might be connected to rent, so things that are outside your control. And then you're thinking, right, there's a bit of a giving lag because new people are coming and we're growing, and that's just what we've seen. But it takes time, and you're the ops person sitting there trying to navigate all this, and yet you want to communicate stewardship, and you want to communicate that actually we thought about this and we're in control of this. This is not something to worry about, but yet also this kind of faith thing that actually, our giving has improved, and we are growing, and God is faithful, and God has all the resources that we need to bless the church and to give us all that we need. How do you do that? And that took a bit of a day just to get the right slides, tell the right stories, think about that. But these are the things, aren't they? These are the decisions that the ops people are sitting there making, going, well, if we're, our deficit was about, 16.5 grand, which in the scheme of things, not a lot, but you can look at that and go, well, if we cut back on training, or we cut back on this, or we cut back on food, or those things, that's where we could save the money to get it to balance. But actually, we might actually be doing some damage there to the ministry if we take that approach. And people are trying to navigate those questions, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're really difficult because as I don't know, maybe there's lots of ops people out there who aren't like me and don't kind of have this sort of tendency towards control freakery and looking at the spreadsheet, and go, we can make this balance, we can make this balance. But there's a real pressure, I suppose, to kind of go, actually, how can we fix this? And sort of grabbing the control back from God and going, actually, I know what the right answer is here. But the reality is, we're never going to cut ourselves to kingdom growth. By doing less is not going to grow the kingdom. Now, that doesn't always necessarily mean that doing more is the answer. But I think there is that reality that you do have to invest for the future.
Yeah.
because if you don't, you really will reap. We will reap a withered harvest. If you're only scattering half the amount of seed, don't be surprised when you're only gathering half the amount of corn in the summer. But that's challenging. And within that, you've got the pressures of transparency and integrity and,
Yeah.
what is too transparent, what is not,
Yeah.
and I think there's some wonderful examples out there of people who are doing some really, really, quite good stuff in sharing, what their needs are and doing that really positively.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's an area to talk to other churches and, what do they do? How do they present their results,
Yeah.
and their needs going forward? And, to sort of plug another sort of resource, Stewardship have just done their generosity reports.
Yeah.
I'd really encourage people to have a look at that. I mean, I think there's some real challenges for churches in that
Oh yeah.
the survey they've done has suggested that people want to hear more teaching on financial stewardship. I think it is something we're nervous about saying anything about. There is, even in the Gospels themselves. I mean, there are times where you're reading, you're almost thinking, is this works?
Yeah.
But actually, it is grace-fueled generosity that we're after. But we also want to equip people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We've got a podcast lined up with stewardship coming in the next couple of months to look at the generosity pool. And I had the same thought, and I think it's really, really helpful for churches to review this stuff. I really enjoyed Andrew Wilson's sort of 25 lessons on money and church leadership, and there's some surprising ones in there. And I know we're going to talk a podcast on it, just talking stewardship about that article, but one of the ones that surprised me was that people give more when there's success as well. So they want to hear about stories and success. They want to see us making progression, and in our roles in admin ops, we're often people that do the measuring and do the things and think about these things, and
Yeah.
nobody else does. But actually, yeah, there is a role here of kind of, as we start talking about deficits, how do you present something in a way that is successful,
Yeah.
that's strategic, that's thinking these things through. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of good
Absolutely.
stuff there to think through. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's really, we had the last year we realised, kind of probably a bit late really, in lots of ways, that if we weren't training more people for church leadership, we wouldn't be planting more churches.
Yeah.
You would think, as I say that, that's fairly obvious. Every church does need a leader. It needs a leadership team, but you do need a
Yeah.
pastor. And we'd really sort of slightly, well, we had taken him off the ball on that. I think that's probably fair to say. And so Andy Mason set out a real challenge for us at our pastors' conference this time last year, to train up more leaders. And when you start looking at the numbers, it becomes terrifying, really. And to raise money to do that. And so we went to our Revive, summer sort of gathering, with an appeal to try and raise money for sending men into training, so that they could become the pastors of the future.
Yeah.
And I think we all kind of felt it was the right thing to do, but I think there was still a sort of element of slightly uncomfortable, asking for money for this. We had some people who were willing to go in, but didn't have the means to go into training.
Yeah.
And so we set out an appeal, which we thought was, I mean, this time last year, I thought it was slightly nuts to try and raise 50 grand from 1,200 adults.
Yeah.
Wonderfully, I mean, just amazingly, actually, by the end of the weekend, we'd raised £181,000.
No way.
Yeah. Now that sounds a lot of money. That goes remarkably quickly when you're training. But I think it's an example of where, our congregation members, they see the need actually probably more than we do sometimes.
Absolutely.
And they are willing to get behind that and to back that.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to pretend or even hint that there is something in that 181,000 that was some kind of divine blessing on us. It was a gift from God without a doubt. It was a work of His Spirit. It's not necessarily because we're doing amazing things. It's because He's doing amazing things in the hearts of people who are there.
Yeah.
And but I do think sometimes we're nervous about standing up and actually getting excited about the mission of the church. But actually, people who are sat there listening are really excited,
Yeah.
and they need something to get behind. And that's the downside of the training example that I've just given is it's actually, in humanly speaking, it's one of the easiest sorts of things to do. You stand up with you've got a really defined thing. That can be harder when it's just day-to-day running costs.
Yeah.
But actually, there are lots of people in your congregation who know what it's like to run a business, understand that it takes, there is a capital requirement to pay salaries and to do that well. And so I think sometimes we can be guilty of just denying people the opportunity of getting involved.
I think that's good. And like you said, like 181,000 in a London context to train somebody to come out of their workplace to do this.
Absolutely.
It's so significant, isn't it? That there's we talk about kind of training funds and those kind of things. It's so expensive now, and you're right, but there is a need, and I think most church leaders that I speak to, raising and training leaders to stay in the church and to also go out and plant, it is one of the most significant kind of priorities that are on the cards, I think, for people at the minute. Churches are thinking through.
Absolutely. As a father of two daughters, I want them to have a choice of churches.
Yeah.
The only way that's going to be the case when they're my age is if we train up the leaders who lead those churches. So yeah, I mean, it's a real privilege. It does feels a burden sometimes, but a good one.
Yeah, indeed.
A good one.
Well, mate, thank you. Thanks for coming on and just sharing a bit about commission, but also just absolutely love you, your heart, and what you're doing. The way you're doing it is so encouraging, and to hear on the podcast is wonderful. So, thanks for taking the time, mate, to be with us.
Thank you, Gavin, and just thank you for all you're doing, for your heart, for people who have, I guess, sometimes felt like they've been in the trenches and are told to jump over the top again. Having something like the church office there as a support and encouragement, as a resource. You've got so much great training. I really do want to commend what you've done to everyone out there, because I think it is absolutely brilliant. The training course that you've done on governance and ops and all that sort of thing is just really been. I found it very helpful. I know others have as well. And so keep going. You're a fantastic resource. You're the most generous, gospel-hearted guy who I have the privilege of knowing who is doing ops stuff, and I love that. So thank you.
That's kind. Thank you very much, and thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I think last month, when somebody in the team was saying we had 700 people listening last month, I just think that's so encouraging for us in kind of a small little niche podcast that just loves the gospel, loves the local church, and wants to encourage people in admin and operations and leadership. Thanks for listening, and if you've got any questions for me or Matthew, if there's any way we can encourage you or connect you, maybe you're in London listening to this or you're further afield, we would love to be able to do that, and would love to be able to serve you in some way. So please get in touch at questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone. Goodbye, everyone.